Hello and welcome to another lecture in medical terminology. In this lecture, we're going to talk about Chapter 8, the female reproductive system. This is part 1 of the lecture series. Well, there will be an introduction, we'll talk about the organs of the female reproductive system, and then talk about menstruation and pregnancy. Just a little bit of a note, I apologize for the lighting a little bit. There isn't very good lighting in this room, but I'm sure you'll understand and be able to get through the lecture nonetheless. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Here are the goals that we hope to accomplish in this chapter. We hope to name and locate the female reproductive organs and learn their combining forms. We hope to explain how these organs and their hormone functions in processes of menstruation and pregnancy, and identify abnormal conditions of the female reproductive system and of the newborn. Now, just to kind of give you a note here, I'm going to do the very best I can to discuss the female reproductive system, but just to let you know, it's not really, I'm not really quite as familiar with the female reproductive system, if you get my drift. So I'll do the best I can. We're also going to describe important laboratory tests and clinical procedures used in gynecology and obstetrics, and recognize related abbreviations and understand medical terms in their proper context, such as medical reports and records. Sexual reproduction is the union, results in the union of the nuclei of ovum and sperm cells. So here we go. We're going to start out here, and we have here the adult human being. Okay, I'm going to identify myself as an individual here on the right. Which one do you identify with? Is it the right or the left? I'll leave that up to you to determine that. And in each one of these adult humans, there are structures known as gonads. Okay, and these gonads here, these are known as gonads, are the reproductive organs of the human being. For men, the gonads are the testicles or testes, and for the women, they're the ovaries. In these specialized organs, they undergo a process known as meiosis, where they create sex cells known as gametes. Check this out, gametes, G-A-M-E-T-E-S, where they contain half the number of chromosomes compared to that of the adult individual. So each one of your cells in an adult cell, so we have here an adult cell, contains 46 chromosomes. Now, when this adult cell undergoes, say, meiosis, now, I'm doing a very condensed down version. Technically, there are specific stem cells that allows the body to create these gametes, but I'm just going to keep it very simple and basic, just call it an adult cell. They undergo this special process known as meiosis, where they create either one of two different kinds of cells. In men, they create the sperm cell, and in women, they create an egg cell. The sperm cells and the egg cells here will then, at a particular point in time, will come together, they will fuse together and create a new zygote. So when they come together, they create a zygote, I'm sorry. Okay? Now, here's the thing though. The adult cell contains 46 chromosomes, but when they undergo this process called meiosis, they've got to have half the count, because imagine if a sperm cell and an egg cell each had 46 chromosomes like the adult cell. When they come together, the new zygote is going to eventually have 92 chromosomes. That's way too many. So here's the thing. When the adult cell undergoes meiosis, each of these sperm and egg cells contains only 23 chromosomes. Oops. Only 23 chromosomes. So that's quite amazing. So that when the sperm and egg cell, each having 23 comes together, the new embryo, the new organism or zygote, is going to have 46. Now, the egg cell is known as the ovum. You might even hear it being called the oocyte. Okay, this is the, this here is the egg cell. Okay, and these egg cells or sperm cells are known as gametes, And each of those gametes contain half the number of chromosomes compared to that of the normal body. Now, once the zygote is formed, the sperm and egg comes together, then they undergo this other process called mitosis, and that mitosis process allows it to divide more and make a bigger, more cells until you come out with a baby, and then that baby undergoes more mitosis and mitosis until you have an adult. And thus starts the cycle all over again. So I hope that gives you a very good introduction on sexual reproduction. Let's go ahead and talk about the gametes individually. Now, the gametes are produced in those structures, as you recall, known as the gonads. Okay, Gonads. And of course, the female gonads are known as the ovaries. So these would be the ovaries there. And in the males, they have gonads known as the testicles. Now, just something for you to know, the ovaries are located internally, okay, inside of the female body, versus the testicles, they're located externally, outside. And in men, for humans, in men, the testicles are located outside of the body in a sac-like structure known as the scrotum. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So here's an example of a female egg cell that's known as a human ovum, around 100 micrometers in diameter, roughly. And as you can see, this female egg contains a lot of interesting structures. We have here the follicular cells. We have here a jelly coat, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We have here a membrane, of course, the common structure known as the cytoplasm, and then we have here the nucleus, and in here we have the nucleolus. We have these other structures here known as polar bodies, which helps to regulate the positional information, how this egg is going to start to develop once the sperm kind of fertilizes with it, and kind of fertilizes with it. And then we have different lipid droplets in here, just some different structures. Now, the female egg here contains that jelly coat, and what happens is when a sperm, let's talk about the sperm first. We have here a human sperm cell. As you can see here that the tail, there's a tail region, and then there is a head region, and then in the center we have here a midpiece which contains these organelles, as you probably remember, are known as mitochondria, and the mitochondria provides that energy molecule known as ATP so that the sperm can start wiggling its way toward the egg cell. Now, this sperm cell is significantly smaller compared to that of the egg cell, very small. And the sperm cell, once it hits the egg cell, it starts to burrow its way through those follicle cells and through that jelly coat. And how it does so is that at the tip of the sperm cell are known as acrosomes, and these acrosomes are enzymes that allow the sperm to burrow its way in there. As soon as a sperm cell releases out its genetic content into the female egg cell, what ends up happening is that the membrane here starts to peel away from that jelly coat, and this prevents a condition known as polyspermia, which is when you have multiple sperm that happens to get into the egg at the same time. And we're not supposed to have that, because if you have two sperm going in there, 23, and the mother's 23 equals way too many chromosomes. So that kind of prevents that condition from happening. Okay, so the sperm cells and the egg cells, they come together and they fuse to form that zygote. Okay, an ovum here leaves the ovaries and travels through the fallopian tube. One of the biggest misconceptions in medicine and health and bio and a lot of classes I've taught is that students believe that the egg cell is released by the ovary and that the sperm cells go into the ovaries and fertilizes the egg in there. Now, let me tell you something. Okay, for all of you who probably had thought that, the ovary contains a heck of a lot of follicular cells. So here we have the uterus, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and then we have the fallopian tubes, and attached to this are the ovaries. Attached to it are the ovaries. Inside here we have a lot of these little sacs, and all of these little sacs are known as follicular cells, and the follicular sacs, they house one egg cell each. And once every 30 to 45 days, one of those sacs ruptures and breaks. And when it breaks, that one special egg cell during that particular period, that menstruation cycle, we'll talk more about that later, that egg cell then leaves out and then travels into the fallopian tube. More about that in a later slide. So the sperm cells, they don't just, let me change my pen color. let me light blue. The sperm cells, they just don't travel their way up here to the fallopian tube, go into the ovary, and then come right back out. Can you imagine if all those sperm cells, of millions and millions of sperm cells, going into the ovary and fertilizing every single one of them? I think the mother would be tremendously upset to have that many babies all at one time. So it makes sense. Those egg cells leave and travels into the fallopian tube where they await fertilization. You only have one egg cell in there. So that makes much more sense than fertilizing that many. Okay. All right, so the fertilized egg here implants, then divides to form a ball of cells known as a zygote, and then later the embryo, and then the fetus. Now, there is some discrepancy in between biology and medicine between what the definition of an embryo and a fetus is. Some textbooks out there in biology or whatever, they say that the embryo is as soon as an egg and cell fertilizes. In our text, we're just going to follow the definition in our textbook where the zygote forms immediately when the sperm and the egg fuse together. And then between 2 to 8 weeks, that's called an embryo. And then between 8 and 38 to 40 weeks, or up until the baby is born, will be known as the fetus. And we have here some images of sperm cells, and sperm cells here trying to fertilize that egg cell. Obviously, in this image, the egg cell has already been fertilized, and all those poor sperm cells just didn't make the cut. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the organs of the female reproductive system. As you can see, we do have the ovaries right over here. Now, the ovaries are attached to a ligament there. This is kind of right here. They do have an utero-ovarian ligament where that keeps them attached there. A lot of individuals believe that the ovaries are attached to the fallopian tube. Not quite. Okay, we'll talk more about that a little bit later. We do have the fallopian tubes. We do have this major structure right here known as the uterus. Okay, we do have that uterus in there. And then we have the endometrial lining, which helps to embed the new fertilized zygote in there, which is the beginnings of the structure known as a placenta for the baby. Let me see. We do have the cervix. Okay, here we have the cervix, and that cervix is like a barrier between the vagina, which is the birth canal, and the uterus. The uterus is sterile. It's supposed to be. It's sterile. And there is this neck portion here, the cervix, which only opens once every 30 to 45 days, and it opens for roughly around 3 days to a week to allow sperm cells to pass through that channel and fertilize the egg cell. Beyond those days, the cervix will be closed shut. There will be this jelly-like structure that is very tough, and it closes that shut to prevent sperm cells from entering the uterus and fertilizing an egg when it's not ready to be fertilized. So again, only once, maybe for a 3 to 7 day period within the menstruation cycle, will the uterus and the female reproductive tract be ready to receive a sperm cell. As you notice here that the fallopian tubes, at the very tip of these, we have these finger-like structures known as the fimbriae. And what's really amazing is this fimbriae isn't quite attached to the ovary. But what happens, it kind of hovers around it. When the egg cell is released from its follicular sac and it comes out and it kind of travels to the surface of the ovary, then what happens, the ovary does something amazing. It kind of does a little toss, tries to get the egg to the fimbriae, where the fimbriae grabs that egg and pulls itself into the fallopian tube. Now, if the fimbriae are unsuccessful in grabbing that egg cell, the egg cell just pretty much stays either on the ovary, it drops somewhere else, and then the egg cell degenerates, therefore the loss of an opportunity to fertilize that egg. Okay, other female reproductive structures here, we do have the external reproductive structures. We have the clitoris here, which is analogous to the glans penis of the male reproductive system. More about the glans penis in the male reproductive system. And we also have here something known as a cul-de-sac. The cul-de-sac here is this structure here between the rectum and the uterus. Yes, and that is pretty much the main idea of the female reproductive system. Now, other structures here that are part of the female reproductive system, some scientists out there still look at this as part of the debate. Is it really part of the female reproductive system? But we're going to go based upon our textbook. The breasts are accessory organs of the female reproductive system. And you can see here is a sagittal view of the breast. And one of the biggest misconceptions the number of individuals have that I've seen in my medical terminology class are that a lot of individuals believe that women do not have pectoralis major or the pectoralis minor muscles because the breast tissue is covering it. So there's a conception out there that they don't have those muscles. Now let me tell you something. If women did not have the pectoralis major or minor muscles, they wouldn't be able to do this, okay? So women indeed definitely have the pectoralis major and minor muscle. It's just, of course, as you can see in our diagram, it is covered by the breast tissue. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Now we have here these structures known as sinuses, which are cavities that carry milk here to the nipple. Here are those sinus structures right over here. Let me change my pen to red. We have those sinus structures right over here. And then we have the glandular tissues, which helps to produce that milk. And then we have these nerve endings, and those nerve endings, those nerve endings kind of causes contraction of those particular glandular tissues to kind of start to synthesize that milk and then to push it out through the ducts into the sinuses and out through the mammary papilla, which is the breast nipple. Okay, this would be here the mammary papilla. Papilla. All right. Now, the structure around the mammary papilla, that soft, the structure here, would be known as areola, which is a dark pigmented area around the mammary papilla. And the hormones that stimulate lactation, which is the process of producing milk, will be prolactin and oxytocin. And as you can see, around the breast tissue, we have a lot of fatty tissues over here as well. Let's go ahead and talk about menstruation and pregnancy. I'm going to do the best I can to describe this process here. Now, when a woman undergoes their very first menstruation cycle, that is known as menarche. Anyone know what the last cycle is? If you've guessed menopause, you are correct. So menopause is the last menstruation cycle. Now, as you can see, based upon our diagram here, the menstruation cycle is between 1 to around 30 days. It depends on the individual. It could go from 30 days maybe up to 45 days. I even heard up to 2 months. It just depends on the average. It's a 30-day cycle. Now, between days 1 through 5, the blood cells, endometrial cells, the glandular secretions, and discharge from the body. And in the ovaries, we still have the ovarian follicles right over here. And we have the ovum, which is housed inside that particular follicle. Not ready yet. Now, at days 6 through 12, the hormone estrogen, which is the female equivalent of testosterone, then aids in the repair of the endometrial lining so that it prepares itself for implantation of a fertilized zygote. And the ovum, a select ovum, begins to grow. At days 13 and 14, then the egg cell leaves the ovary and passes through into the fallopian tube. And as you can see here, it ruptures right here. The ovum ruptures away and it leaves into the fallopian tube, leaving behind this corpse or corpus luteum. And that corpus luteum there then begins to act as sort of a hormone center, and it secretes out progesterone at days 15 to 28 in order to further regulate the female reproductive system in preparation for fertilization with a sperm cell. Okay. Now, say that fertilization does happen, then of course you get the condition known as pregnancy, and this you can see here. The egg cell goes into the fallopian tube, it becomes fertilized somewhere in its path, and then inside the fallopian tube contains there's these little finger-like cilia that helps to wave and push it into the uterus. Okay, little it starts to wave it down, very much like if you were at an amusement park and you're waiting in this long line, and sometimes you have this fun squad with the beach ball, and they come out and then they toss the ball into the crowd, and the crowd's hitting the ball toward each other. That's what the cilia in the female fallopian tubes are doing. They are wish-washing that egg toward the uterus. Once it starts to implant itself into the endometrial lining, that would be the beginning of the placenta that attaches to that uterine wall. Now, the amnion holds the fetus in an amniotic cavity, as you can see here, as it grows larger and larger, and the nutrients, oxygen, and waste exchange between the fetus and the mother happen at this area here. So the placenta, as you can see, we have the umbilical arteries and the vein, and these arteries and vein attaches into the placenta where the mother's blood vessels and the baby's blood vessels are kind of near each other, but they don't cross. Okay, I hope that that's clear. They are not crossing, they're not connected, they're hovered over each other, and through the process of diffusion, the materials diffuse back and forth. So you're probably asking me this question. The baby needs oxygen in order to survive. That one, I'm pretty sure you would agree with me on. There is this protein in the red blood cells known as what? If you said hemoglobin, you're correct. There is hemoglobin in the mother's cells, red blood cells, that houses that oxygen and then transports them to the tissue. But we're talking about baby's blood and mother's blood. And if the baby's blood there's blood there, and the mother's blood has blood, how do we get the mother's blood to transfer that oxygen over to the baby? Well, here's the thing though. If the baby were to have hemoglobin, there isn't really incentive for the oxygen to leave the mother's hemoglobin and go into the baby. So rather than the baby having hemoglobin, they temporarily have a different kind known as myoglobin. Okay, and myoglobin has a much stronger affinity for oxygen compared to that of hemoglobin, so that gives the oxygen on the hemoglobin motivation to switch to the baby's hemoglobin, and therefore that myoglobin will transport that oxygen for the developing embryo. Now the placenta here takes over a lot of the primary functions that the baby has yet to develop. For example, oxygenation of the blood. The placenta takes care of that. The removal of waste products from the developing baby, because the baby, of course, has cells, and those cells go through this process known as cellular respiration. They take energy, they consume it, and they let go of waste. Nitrogenous waste also. It's got to go somewhere. The placenta takes care of that function. The placenta also takes care of a lot of many other kinds of functions, of hormone production. For example, the placenta produces human chorionic gonadotropin, or abbreviated as HCG, in there as well. So the placenta takes over a lot of the main functions until the developing embryo has developed those organs to be independent for themselves. Now, this hormone HCG here is present in urine during pregnancy, in the mother's urine. So that is one of the ways in which a healthcare professional can detect whether or not the mother's pregnant, is to detect for any concentration of human chorionic gonadotropin. Okay. Now that's when fertilization does happen. But what happens when fertilization does not occur? Well, what happens here is that the corpus luteum, which is that leftover follicle after the egg cell has left, that's that leftover structure, stops producing progesterone because there's nothing to maintain in the female reproductive system. There is no baby, no developing embryo to maintain. So its purpose is, we don't have one, so it stops producing that. And then a condition starts to arise known as premenstrual syndrome, or abbreviated here as PMS, which is when you have lowered levels of progesterone and estrogen, and because of that, that is responsible for depression, breast tenderness, and irritability for the female. Now, in this slide, I don't have an image, but I'm pretty sure you can fill in your notes as needed. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about here the pregnancy. Now, progesterone. Now, if fertilization does happen and there is pregnancy, progesterone helps maintain the placenta's development. And while the embryo is developing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, then the uterus begins to expand in order to help accommodate how large the embryo and the fetus is growing. And at the time when the mother is ready to give birth, the baby will start to flip around, and hopefully the head will start to present itself first out of the birth canal. It doesn't happen all the time. Obviously, nothing in life is perfect, but an ideal case, the baby will rotate and then the head will start to present itself through the vaginal canal, the birth canal, I'm sorry. And that will be the birth of the baby first. However, after the baby is born, the job's not over yet. The mother still has to give birth to one more structure, and that structure here is the placenta. Now, fair warning here. When the baby is born, it doesn't mean the placenta is all detached and ready to go. The mother has to wait for the placenta to slowly, through the hormone processes, slowly peel itself away. And then give birth to the placenta, which is after that. If the mother kind of just, okay, baby's born, now time to take out the placenta right away, it could cause a rupture in the uterus and tears in there, which could cause a lot of bleeding in there. So we don't want to have that happen. You want to let the body naturally peel away that placenta and then give birth to the placenta. So there are two processes there, the birth of the baby and the birth of the placenta. And as I mentioned earlier, the normal delivery of fetal position here is cephalic. What does cephalic mean? Pertaining to the head. Okay, so the head comes out first. Now, pregnancy here happens in 3 stages. The first stage here is a dilation and thinning of the cervix. You can see here the cervix is closed shut because obviously while the mother is living her day-to-day life and doing her daily activities, you don't want the baby as she's walking to just drop on out. So the cervix is very closed and shut to hold the baby in the uterus. When the baby is ready to be born, the cervix begins to open up and dilate and starts to thin out. As you can see here, this is the before, and here is the after picture. You can see that the cervix is much thinner, much more wide compared to that of during pregnancy. Now, stage 2 here is the birth of the infant. As you can see, the baby's head is coming out first, and this is known as crowning. Crown. The baby's head here comes out first. Now, it is said that when the baby is born, to kind of when like say a midwife or a medical EMT or maybe even the OBGYN comes and helps give birth to the baby, it's always said that to help the baby come out by moving the head down and hoping to expose the first shoulder, one of the shoulders. Once one of the shoulder comes out, then the baby naturally will just come out. Okay, will naturally just come out with smooth delivery. Sometimes the shoulders get caught between in the cervix and the vaginal, the birth canal. So therefore, letting a shoulder come out will allow the baby to be easily delivered. And of course, the third stage here is a delivery of the placenta. Oh, just to kind of let you know, when a baby is born, you can see that the umbilical cord and the placenta are still connected to the baby. It's always said that while the umbilical cord is still there, and if it's not tied up yet, to keep the baby at level with the placenta. Because the laws of physics say that if the placenta is here and the baby is there, the blood will be pretty even. If the placenta is here and the baby is down here, the blood's going to rush out into the baby. Now, if the placenta is here and the baby is there, then the blood's going to rush back into the placenta. So it's always said in healthcare to leave the baby at level with the placenta until the tubes are tied up so the blood doesn't travel at random places. Again, it goes into placenta, goes into the baby. Okay. Now let's go ahead and talk about some of the hormonal interactions here. There's the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland here secretes out follicle-stimulating hormones, and abbreviated here as FSH, which helps to maintenance and manage those follicle cells. And another one here is luteinizing hormone known as LH. Now, the pituitary gland stops producing FSH and LH during pregnancy or with oral contraceptives. Now, at menopause, which is the gradual ending of menstruation, so it could be the last cycle or it's a gradual slowly ending, that normally happens between the ages of 45 to 55 where estrogen levels begin to fall. The female system, at the onset of menarche, over time will get very used to the amount of estrogen levels there. The human body is quite an amazing thing. It gets used to its surroundings, gets used to its hormone levels as well. But at menopause, estrogen, which is the main hormone that helps to maintain the female reproductive system, maintain the females as well, it starts to drop down drastically, and so the body's the female body's kind of going, well, what's going on here? I'm used to this much estrogen, and now all of a sudden you're dropping me down. That's what leads to a lot of hot flashes, a lot of imbalances out there. Okay, so one of the therapies out there used to kind of help alleviate that is known as estrogen replacement therapy. If during menopause estrogen levels drop, we'll just push it right back up. Problem here is that since the female reproductive system has ended releasing out egg cells, you're pretty much pushing hormone levels above the maintenance level that is needed. So even though in the short run the estrogen levels there will be normal and then will be at a normal level compared to when there was menstruation, but again over time may cause cancerous conditions as well. It's because the body is no longer maintaining the female reproductive system. There is nothing left to maintain. We don't have a corpus luteum anymore. We don't have follicular cells anymore, so there's nothing to maintain. So that's an excessive amount of estrogen there. So good for the short term, not very good for the long term. So that ends part one of our lecture series on the female reproductive system. I hope you come back for part two of the female reproductive system. Until then, I'll see you later.